HDNet presents the 6th Brown and Black Presidential Forum. Live from North High School in Des Moines, Iowa. Now here are your moderators, Michelle Norris and Ray Suarez.
Right now we hear behind us the color guard. Good evening and welcome to the 6th Iowa Brown and Black Forum, live on HDNet. I'm Michelle Norris of National Public Radio's All Things Considered, and I'm joined by my friend and fellow moderator, Ray Suarez, from PBS's NewsHour with Jim Lair. For the next 2 hours, we will be exploring vital issues of concern to African American and Latino voters. These are issues, of course, of vital concern to all Americans: immigration, civil rights, education, the economy, and job opportunity.
Muy buena noche, Michelle.
Gracias.
Tengo el honor de dar la bienvenida a todos nuestros votantes latinos. Aunque estamos presentando nuestro programa en inglés, vamos a oír de nuestros candidatos sobre temas muy importantes a la comunidad latina. El estado de Iowa, hoy es el lugar en donde se presenta una población latina que está creciendo en gran número y refleja de tendencia nacional. Now, we're honored, of course, to be joined tonight by almost all of the 8 Democratic candidates for president here at Des Moines North High School. Their positions on stage were chosen at random from left to right. They are Senator Chris Dodd of Connecticut, Senator Hillary Clinton of New York, former United States Senator John Edwards of North Carolina, Congressman Dennis Kucinich of Ohio. We are expecting Joe Biden to arrive, and when he arrives, we will add him to the program, but you should know around the country that this has been a tough weather day in Iowa, and travel's been challenging to say the least. United States Senator Barack Obama from Illinois, and Governor Bill Richardson of New Mexico.
Well, before we begin tonight, we would like to thank North High School here in Des Moines for hosting this event. We'd also like to acknowledge and thank the forum's co-founders and co-chairs, Iowa State Representative Wayne Ford and Mary Campos. Wayne and Mary, thank you so much for inviting us to be a part of this extraordinary event. The first Black and Brown Forum was back in 1984, and since then it has grown both in prominence and in scope. It is now a force in both Iowa and national politics. This forum is nonpartisan, and all presidential candidates are invited to participate. However, no Republicans accepted this year's invitation. And again, if you're seeing an empty chair there, we expect to be joined by Senator Joe Biden, and Mike Gravel, unfortunately, was unable to make it.
So before we begin, a quick explanation of tonight's format and rules.
Ray and I will be asking questions, as well for panelists, who we will introduce shortly. We will also hear from some students from here at North High School. And finally, the candidates will have the opportunity to direct questions to each other. Candidates will have 1 minute for their answers, and we will follow with rebuttals as necessary. Also, they will be 1 minute each. Ray and I will step in with follow-up questions when appropriate, and each candidate will have the opportunity to make a 1 minute closing statement. So, without further ado, let's get started. Now, it's like that old song, "Ooh, baby, it's cold outside." It certainly is cold, and thanks to all of you for making the effort to be with us tonight. I know that you had to travel through perilous conditions, so though it's cold outside, once we actually get started this evening, I think I can say with a fair degree of confidence that it's probably going to warm up here inside the auditorium. We want to tonight focus on issues that are important, of great importance to people of color, but really issues that are important to all Americans. We want to talk tonight about race, something that people are often uncomfortable talking about. We hope to put that on the table. We hope to wrestle with a very difficult question that people still debate, the question of whether demography helps determine destiny. In the short time that I have been in Iowa, I have talked with many people, and one of the things that I've heard over and over again in discussions, particularly with people of color, is the concern about the high incarceration rate for people of color, particularly here in Iowa. So I just want to begin with a few statistics that will put this in perspective. If present trends continue, 1 out of every 3 Black males born today can expect to go to prison. 60% of the people in prison are racial or ethnic minorities. In every state in this country, and that bears repeating, in every state in this country, the percentage of Blacks and Hispanics in prison exceeds the percentage of Blacks and Hispanics in the general population. And right here in Iowa, the incarceration rate for Black men is more than 13 times higher than for white men. That is the highest disparity in the country, and that's right here in this state. My first question is to former Senator John Edwards. How would you, as a candidate, propose addressing criminal justice reform? Do you believe that it is something that is worthy of close examination? And how would you do that? How would you try to reduce the prison pipeline without leaving yourself as a candidate or your party vulnerable to the criticism that Democrats are soft on crime?
Well, thank you, and thank all of you for being here tonight. And before I begin with that, if I can just say to Senator Clinton and all the people who work for her how glad we are about the result of this terrible thing that happened in New Hampshire. And we're proud of what you've done and proud of what your campaign done. All of us recognize who are in these presidential campaigns, these young people who devote their lives to change the country, whatever candidate they're for. So we're all very thankful for the result of what happened in New Hampshire. I think we have an enormous problem with our criminal justice system, to answer your question. You've just described the problem. Young African-American men in many places in the country believe that the only thing that's going to happen to them is they're either going to die or go to prison. They believe they live lives of hopelessness, no chance whatsoever. That has to change. And I think there are a variety of things that we have to change. We have to change these mandatory minimum sentences, especially for first offenses, nonviolent first offenses. We need to have alternatives to incarceration, like drug courts, for example. We need to get rid of the disparity between crack and powder cocaine, which the Sentencing Commission has proposed doing but it's something that actually needs to be implemented into law. So there are a variety of things we need to do to make this criminal justice system work. And can I just say one last thing? I know that we have time limits. I don't want to go over them. But the one last thing is we have to create an infrastructure for young people who have a brush with the law, who've grown up in a difficult environment, to be able to turn their lives around. That means drug counseling and rehabilitation, alcohol counseling and rehabilitation, making certain they get job training, making sure they get education, so they don't go right back to the environment that got them in trouble to begin with.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to turn now to Senator Clinton, if I could. I want to also reiterate Mr. Edwards' statement. We are so glad that you and your staff are safe. And we're also so glad that you made it here tonight. I understand the travel conditions were very, very, very difficult. This question is posed to you. We just heard about the sentencing guidelines for crack versus the sentencing guidelines and the disparity for those who are convicted of crimes involving crack cocaine and crimes involving powder cocaine. The U.S. Sentencing Commission just took steps to try to limit those guidelines, to close that gap. There's now a debate as to whether those who were convicted days or even decades before the U.S. Sentencing Commission made that change, if this should be retroactive, if this should also apply to those who were convicted days and perhaps decades before this change was made. What is your view on that?
Well, Michelle, thank you, and I am very grateful for the prayers and the good wishes. All of my friends here on the stage, as well as Senator Biden, called yesterday, and we are very relieved at the way it turned out. I believe we've got to decrease the disparity that exists. It is really unconscionable that someone who uses 5 grams of crack cocaine or compared to 500 grams of powder cocaine would face such disparate sentencing. And it's further compounded because the possession of crack cocaine really is unique in the way that it leads directly to prison for so many people. So I am going to tackle the disparity. I think it definitely needs to be prospective. On principle, I have problems with retroactivity. I think that is something that a lot of communities will be concerned about as well. So let's tackle this disparity. Let's take it on. The Sentencing Commission hasn't come forward yet with its specific recommendation, but I'm looking forward to seeing it.
I need to toss to my good friend Ray, but I'm going to do something very quickly. Just on the question of retroactivity, a simple yes or no answer. Senator Dodd?
I'd be inclined to say yes on retroactivity.
Yes, okay. Former Senator Edwards?
I'm not inclined to say yes. The answer is yes. Absolutely, it should be retroactive.
Mr. Yes. Representative Kucinich? Yes. Senator Obama? Governor Richardson?
I am no.
Okay. That was clear. Ray?
Senator Dodd, this week the administration proposed freezing the interest rates for a lot of subprime mortgages around the country that are about to trend up in interest rates. And when you pick up the paper every day, it seems like the home financing system in this country is having something close to a nervous breakdown. And the burden of that lands disproportionately on minority homeowners. But some are suggesting this isn't the fix, that merely freezing home rates for people who are in bad mortgages and can't get out just delays the reckoning that's surely going to come. How would you fix this? Do you agree with the proposal?
I think it's a pretty good idea. In fact, we've made a similar suggestion. I've been wrestling with this now since the last March and April when we first learned of the magnitude of the problem. Met with a lot of these stakeholders to try and convince them to meet with their borrowers here to provide those kind of workouts so people could maintain their presence in their homes. And the idea of freezing that rate, either at that teaser rate, these predators that drew people in, would allow, I think, a couple of things to happen. One, people to stay in their homes, hopefully many of them, but also the financial institutions. They're better off getting 3 or 4% back than nothing when you have a foreclosure occur. So I'm inclined to like this idea. We're also working, I would say, Ray, on trying to make sure this doesn't happen again. This was outrageous what went on here. The fact that there were no cops on the beat, this administration basically walked away from this, and you have 3 times people of color in this country are being lured into subprime lending. Many of them are eminently qualified for prime lending. We're drawn into the worst of all of those deals here. Brokers that, frankly, were not declaring who their financial relationship was with at all, getting them to pay very high rates. and then, of course, moving on and selling these things along in the market with no one being accountable. So we want to address the future problem. But for those today in that situation, I think, frankly, the idea of freezing will help. I just make one quick point as well here. It's not just the person in foreclosure. If you take a square block in this country, in a fragile neighborhood, one foreclosure in that block will cause every other property to decline in value by $3,000 to $5,000 within an hour of that foreclosure. So this problem is not just affecting those who were caught into a very bad deal, but other neighborhoods, again, are going to be adversely affected, and why it needs to be addressed promptly.
Senator Obama, I'd like to move to you next. Just recently, a report came out in the national newspapers that found that middle-class black families were not able to carry their children into the American middle class. That an astonishing number of children that grew up in middle-class families had fallen out of the middle class and into poverty. Why do you think that happened? And is there an appropriate role, given what the constitutional description of the job of president is, to do something about it beyond just saying, that's terrible?
Suits standing out in the back looking at what just happened. Oh no.
I can hear that.
Hey, how about, is the mic on yet? No? All right. Well,
Okay, we're not taking away from your time, Senator. You should be.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Better?
Is that
Better. Good.
okay?
Go ahead, sir.
Carry an empty file.
Still, do we have a handheld mic? I'm happy to use that.
He's okay now.
I'm all right now? Yes? Okay, good. One of the reasons that I'm running for president is that the American dream has always meant that if you worked hard, if you invested in your children, then their lives could be better than yours. And that dream that so many generations fought for feels like it's slipping away. I think about my father-in-law, who's now passed away. Here's a man who, at the age of 30, was stricken with multiple sclerosis on the south side of Chicago, nevertheless was able to work as a municipal worker, had a good job, could have a house, was able to have health insurance, was able to send his children, including my wife Michelle, to college, and they have achieved in ways that he would have never dreamed. That's been lost, not just for African Americans increasingly, but for all Americans. And so what do we need to do? We have to have a tax system that's fair. I will take away tax breaks from companies that are shipping jobs overseas and put tax breaks in the pockets of hard-working Americans who deserve it. We've got to invest in education in a much more serious way. And I put forward a plan to put $18 billion a year in early childhood education, improving teacher salaries, improving the infrastructure for our schools. If we can invest and understand that this is a crisis that doesn't just affect black and brown people, but all of America, I'm confident that we can make a big difference.
Thank you, Senator. Let's go next. Let's go next to Michelle Norris with the first of our candidate questions.
For those who follow the Brown and Black Forum, you know one of the hallmarks of this event is that we allow candidates to ask other candidates questions directly. And that first question is going to come from Senator Dodd. I will repeat. One of the hallmarks of the Brown and Black Forum, can you all hear me now? Yeah. Good. One of the hallmarks of the Brown and Black Forum is that we allow candidates to ask other candidates questions directly. This evening, that first question will come from Senator Dodd.
Well, thank you, Michelle, very much. Let me, back in 2001, the Congress passed, I think, one of the worst pieces of legislation in a long time, the so-called the Bankruptcy Reform Act here. My friends, Senator Clinton, Senator Biden, who's not here, and Senator Edwards, voted for that bankruptcy reform bill, which drove a lot of people, working-class families, into poverty, made it very difficult for them to manage their lives, to get back on their feet again. And so, John, I'd like to ask you the question, because you've made a big issue of this issue of poverty, something you've dedicated your life to here. Could you explain to me why, in the midst of that, only 5 or 6 years ago, you'd vote for a piece of legislation like that, which did so much damage to so many families in our country?
Yeah, I was wrong. I was wrong, and you were right, Chris. I should not have voted for that bankruptcy bill. It was a bad piece of legislation. I think any of us who voted for it were wrong to have voted for it. I think there were some good provisions in it, but I think on the whole, when you look at it, it actually did damage to low-income families and working families in this country. And as you just pointed out, You know, it is the cause of my life to do something about 37 million people who live in poverty every day in the United States of America. It will be the cause of my life as long as I'm alive and breathing. And whatever we can do to strengthen low-income families, to raise the minimum wage, to strengthen the right of unions to organize in the workplace, to have a national predatory lending law that cracks down on the very predators that you were speaking about earlier, Chris, to allow kids to go to college who are willing to work when they're in college. Those are the causes that I'm committed to, and it is the cause of my life to do something about the issue of people who live in poverty, the homeless, the hungry. We had 35 million of those last year, and I'm completely committed to those causes. But just to be clear, on this issue, you were right and I was wrong.
I just... The only point I want to make, and I appreciate John's answer on that, there were 3 votes. There was the vote in 2000, and then there were 2 votes in 2001. I appreciate you being wrong. I want to make it clear, it was wrong 3 times. And
but I didn't vote that way 3 times.
Well,
I didn't vote that way 3 times. In any event, I was wrong on the bill.
Governor Richardson, we live in a country today where Latino and black household wealth, not income, but accumulated household wealth, is about 10% for the average black and brown family of what it is for the average white family. And we've posted these statistics even during decades of very rapid economic growth, where the GDP has been going up, the average household income has been going up, the average wage has been going up. Yet, black and brown people in the United States are not able to accumulate wealth that can be passed on to children, that can be used to leverage other kinds of loans, to borrow for education or starting a business. How did we get here, and how do we get out of it? A 90% gap.
What was that? What? Mixed up.
Okay, we're gonna get you another microphone. People should bear with us and understand that when there are 10 live mics on a floor, this is a very difficult situation. Okay, Dennis Kucinich, let me throw you that same question, and Governor, you will have a chance to respond. But Cleveland is a place where you can see this written in bricks and mortar, written in bank balances every day, and it's a place where you were mayor and now serve as a congressman.
Why don't you hand it? Hey, Brock, hand that to Dennis. Hand that to Dennis. To your left.
What?
Look to your left.
Oh, we got it?
There you go.
Great answer, Dennis.
Barack, I want to thank you for passing the baton in this race. You're right about cities like Cleveland, and I see my good friend, my partner and sister, Stephanie Tubb-Jones from Cleveland. We face a situation where there is a massive amount of foreclosures, rising unemployment particularly around African-American households and some Latinos. Here's my plan. First of all, a full employment economy, a Roosevelt-type WPA program that puts everyone who's able to work back to work with a living wage. Second, a not-for-profit health care system where everyone in America is covered, you know, without any regards to paying premiums, co-pays, and deductibles. Third, universal pre-kindergarten, so children aged 3, 4, and 5 will have access to full-quality daycare funded by a 15% cut in the bloated Pentagon budget. Fourth, universal college education, so our young people who are college age will be able to have a 2- and 4-year free public education funded by the government that spends the money into circulation. So we need to make economic reform the fundamental driving force in this country, and President Kucinich stands for the principle of a rising tide lifts all boats, not trickle-down economics. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman. We're going to take a quick break right now. Stay with us. We'll be back shortly. Thanks for staying with us here at the Brown and Black Forum in Des Moines, Iowa. We're going to continue our program tonight with the candidates for president speaking to minority issues. And we seem to have sorted out our audio problems. And now I want to once again address Governor Bill Richardson, who wasn't able to answer us earlier. But I'm not sure yet if he's aware. No, he's not aware yet that we're trying to begin again. Let's try to get some order in the House. There we go. They want to get on with it too. And let's continue. Governor Bill Richardson, let me give you a chance to answer that question about household wealth and what the President of the United States can do about it and what some of the causes are for these persistent gaps.
Well, I said earlier, I would be the real education president. I think the key is jobs and education. We're not talking enough about jobs in this campaign, but education, in my judgment, is the key. I've outlined a $60 billion plan to make America education #1 in the world again. This is what I would do. And the statistic you did not mention is that 1 out of 2 African American and Hispanic youth don't get through high school. And that is a huge tragedy, and there's been no improvement. Preschool for every child under 4. You get the kids early. Full-day kindergarten. Investments in science and math academies, because we're 29th in the world when it comes to science and math. Art in the school programs. And here at North High School, I want to commend the drama department and all the great work that you do, because I believe that having a strong art in the school program is going to make us more competitive in science and math. I'd get rid of No Child Left Behind. That is an impediment. And I would also have a minimum wage. I'd have a minimum wage for our teachers at $40,000. And let me conclude with this. National service. This is what I mean. College loans, unaffordable. Rip-off artists, banks, student loan companies. Here's my plan. 2 years in exchange, 2 years of government loans. The government helps pay for tuition. 1 year of national service by the student.
Sorry to cut you off there, but we have many questions and many people who want to pose questions to you. We turn now to our distinguished panel of community leaders. Try that one more time. I had first expressed apology for cutting you off. We have many questions and we have many people who would like to pose questions to the candidates. We will turn now to our distinguished panel of community activists. Our first question is going to come from Juan Andrade. He is the president of the U.S. Hispanic Leadership.
Thank you, Michelle. My question is to Senator Clinton. In an editorial yesterday, the Chicago Sun-Times said, quote, "The bitter hostility aimed at illegal immigrants stems in great part from immigrants' failure to learn English," end quote. Believe me, immigrants are trying hard to learn English, as they should. But until they do, would you be willing to use your command of the English language to help dispel the negative perception of illegal immigrants, undocumented workers that more and more Americans are beginning to have? And if yes, what would you say?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because I think this is one of the most important issues facing our country, and I deeply regret the way the Republicans are politicizing and demagoguing this issue. If you listen to their debates, they're trying to outdo each other in basically demeaning and attacking those who are here in our country, yes, without documentation, but who are often doing the work that keeps our country going and raising their families and making a contribution. The answer is comprehensive immigration reform. And I think we have to keep talking about that and keep working toward it. And for me, that's yes, we've got to have tougher border security. We do have to crack down on employers who exploit and employ undocumented people. We've got to do more to help local communities bear the costs of it, because they don't set immigration laws. We've got to do more with our neighbors to the south to help them create more economic opportunity for their own people. But at the end of the day, there has to be an earned path to legalization. And yes, along that path, there should be every effort made to learn English. but we're not providing enough resources for programs to help people learn English. So I intend to stand for and pass comprehensive immigration reform when I'm president.
Thank you, Senator Clinton. Our next question comes from Dr. Benjamin Chavis. He is president and CEO of the Hip Hop Summit Action Network.
Thank you. This question is for Senator Obama. Some 40 years ago, blacks and Latinos in the South Bronx created a culture known as hip hop. And this debate, this forum so far has talked about the issues that divide us: race, poverty, disproportionate incarceration. This question comes from the hip hop perspective. My friend Russell Simmons and all, we're very interested to know, since hip hop today in 2007, 2008 transcends race. 2004, we got a lot of people registered to vote for the first time. Some millions of young people went to the polls. Millions more are going to go in 2008. What can you say? If you were president of the United States, how would you embrace the hip hop generation?
Well, one of the exciting things about this campaign has been how young people have been coming out in record numbers. And it is because young people recognize that the issues that we're facing, whether it's college tuition or climate change or the genocide in Darfur, that all these things impact them. And they are eager to get involved. They haven't been invited to be involved. And one of the goals, I think, of this election has to be to send a message to a young generation: you can remake the world. And particularly young African American and Latino men and women and others who oftentimes feel locked out of the process. They feel as if nobody's speaking to their issues. They feel as if nobody is listening to them. And one of the things that we've been able to do, I think, in this campaign, and what we will continue to do, is to encourage young people to mobilize, get registered, to vote, and what you pointed out, the prospect of of bridging divides between African American and Latinos is critical. Dr. King, during the farm workers' strike, when Cesar Chavez was trying to organize farm workers, wrote him a letter saying, our cause is one, our struggle is one. And we've lost that sense across racial divisions, across religious divisions and regional divides, that our cause is one, but young people, I think, recognize that, and that's one of the opportunities that we have in this election. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Obama. Another question for John Edwards. You were born in South Carolina. You went on to represent North Carolina. Can you hear me? I almost feel like I should throw salt over my shoulder to make sure that the microphone is working. You were born in South Carolina. You went on to represent North Carolina in the Senate. You're old enough, or I should say maybe you are of an age to remember when we lived in a very segregated society, when people of different races attended different schools, lived in different neighborhoods, used different water fountains. I'm interested in your view on how far we've actually come as a society. When you look at those who are running for president this year, for those who are either black or Latino, has their race helped or hurt them?
Well, I don't think it's hurt them, first of all.
I think that if you grew up the way I did, and you've described it very well, I grew up in the 50s and 60s in the South, in South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina, and I grew up in the segregated South. I saw up close, what it means to have overt discrimination. I saw how African Americans, including my friends, were treated. I saw how Ben Chavis, who just asked Barack Obama that question a few minutes ago, and who led the Wilmington 10 in North Carolina, was treated by the North Carolina justice system. Thank God he had James Ferguson, Julius Chambers, who's the treasurer of my campaign, representing him and standing up for him. But the answer to your question, the answer to your question is we have made progress, but we have much progress left to make. And the extraordinary inequality that we have been discussing here tonight, whether it's education inequality, healthcare inequality, income inequality, asset inequality, across that entire waterfront, If you are African American in this country today, you are much more likely to have health care problems, to not have health care coverage, to not have 10% of the assets, as Ray mentioned a few minutes ago, that white families have. So have we made progress? Yes, we have made progress, but we have a long march in front of us to create the equality that Dr. King spoke about.
Very quickly, you answered part of that question, but not all of it. You said for Senator Barack Obama, for Governor Richardson, that race did not hurt them. Just very quickly, did it help them?
I don't know the answer to that question. I honestly don't know the answer to that question. I think that if I can only speak for myself. Speaking for myself as somebody who grew up in the segregated South, I'm very proud of the fact that my party has a woman running for president, has an African American running for president, and has a Latino running for president. I think that's a great thing.
Question for Senator Obama. It's something that is discussed at kitchen tables, at lunch counters, and the front pages of newspapers, on the radio, and on television. The question of support for you as a candidate. Nationally, Hillary Clinton, polls show that Hillary Clinton is drawing more support from African Americans, even though you're an African American candidate. How do you read those numbers? How do you explain that?
Well, nationally, Senator Clinton, I think, is very well known, and for wonderful public service that she's rendered, as well as her husband. And African American voters are like any other voters, which is that until they get to know you and your track record, then they're going to be asking questions. They're not sure. And so in the state of Illinois, up until a month before I ran for the United States Senate, we had a third of the African American vote. We ended with 92%. Because people started finding out this is somebody who's worked for racial profiling legislation. This is somebody who has helped to bring an end to wrongful convictions in death penalty cases. This is somebody who has expanded health care for people who didn't have it. So my job is to get known in this race. But understand this, African American voters, Latino voters, women voters, what they're really concerned about is not identity issues or symbolism. They're trying to figure out who's going to help make sure they can pay the rent? Who is going to make sure that they don't lose their house? Who's going to make sure that they can send their children to college? And I believe I can bring the country together, overcome the special interests, stand up for what's right in order to make that happen. And, we're doing pretty well in Iowa so far, where people are getting to know that record.
Thank you so much. Now to my friend Ray Suarez.
Senator Edwards, there's compelling research to show that high levels of immigration to the United States in the last 20 years, both legal and illegal, has had a big role in depressing the wages of black men, working specifically in construction, in landscaping, food processing, and in agriculture. Do you support a path to citizenship for people who entered the country illegally? And if you do, how do you make the case to black Americans, many of whom have been here centuries already, that having that path to citizenship is not a threat to them?
Well, first of all, I think the plight of immigrant workers is in many ways similar to the plight of minorities across the board in the United States of America. African Americans have lived through decades of slavery, followed by decades of segregation, followed by decades of discrimination. We see similar patterns happening with Latinos who have come into the United States of America and being mistreated, ill-treated, in many cases by their employers. By the way, I want to quarrel with the statistic that you spoke about a few minutes ago. There are also lots of studies indicating that what you just suggested is not true, that immigrant workers have not driven down wages. And I think the answer to this, the answer to your question specifically, is yes, I do support a path to citizenship. I also support doing the things necessary to ensure that young African American men, African American workers are able to earn a decent wage. And that means raising the minimum wage. It means expanding the Earned Income Tax Credit. It means strengthening the right of unions to organize in the workplace. There are a whole group of things that we can do to strengthen the wages and income from African Americans, and I'm committed to do that as President of the United States of America.
Thank you, Senator.
I'd like to now welcome to the Brown and Black Forum this evening Senator Joe Biden of Delaware. Senator, please join us. And Senator, if I can give you a chance to brush the sleet off your lapels and get mic'd up and.
7-hour ride from Chicago. I apologize. And I don't have a plane.
But let me get you right into the forum, since you're here and the others have already had a chance to speak to the audience this evening. We need to find an answer. Across the spectrum, people say we need to find an answer to the challenges surrounding the presence of illegal workers, people who are not supposed to be in the country, who are here and working. What is your answer, very briefly, to whether there should be a path to citizenship for upwards of 12 million people?
There should be, but let's get something straight here. This is not a zero-sum game. I was off stage hearing about black and Hispanic. Look, that's what white boys have done a long time, banging people against one another. Let's get this straight. It has nothing to do with black versus Hispanic. There's plenty of opportunity for both, number one. Number two, 60% of the illegals are not Hispanic. They're undocumented aliens here. They're coming from Ireland, Poland. They're coming from other places around the world. Number three, if you don't let those people out of the shadows, then, ladies and gentlemen, 1.8 million of them are children. What are you going to do? What kind of country are we? That's the reason why we have to provide a path for citizenship. That's the reason why we have to have things like the DREAM Act for those 1.8 million children. That's why we have to incorporate them into the community and not let other people, not let the established system play one against the other. That's what they tried to do in my town. I get 98% of the black vote, by the way, in my state. 98%. I have the 8th largest black population in the country, and I've spent my time bringing together the Hispanic and African American community, and it's starting to work. But don't let them be pitted against one another. Don't play that game.
Senator Biden, thank you very much.
Thanks for the opportunity to be here, I promise.
We're just glad you're here. And safely. This question is for Senator Clinton. A large percentage of Americans support normalizing relations with Cuba and loosening travel restrictions. What would you do as president with regard to normalizing relations, ending the trade embargo, opening the door to travel and to diplomatic relations with Cuba?
Well, I think we're going to have that opportunity because I believe that when Fidel Castro finally does pass on, there will be a tremendous pent-up desire on the part of the Cuban people for freedom and for democracy. Certainly, if they were to make steps right now to recognize human rights, to release political prisoners, there could be perhaps some reciprocal action taken by the United States. But until there is some recognition on the part of whoever is in charge of the Cuban government that they have to move toward democracy and freedom for the Cuban people, it will be very difficult for us to change our policy. But I look forward as president to perhaps being there when that opportunity arises. You know, it's tragic that in the last 7 years we've lost ground in Latin America. We've lost it as more and more countries have moved away from democracy, authoritarian, even dictatorial rule. We see what's happening in Venezuela with the big power grab going on by Chavez. And I hope that when I'm president, we can get re-engaged and we pay more attention to Latin America and we start building relationships again. I think that's important for us and important for the people of those countries.
Thank you. Just a very quick follow-up. You said that the U.S. may soon have an opportunity, but Fidel Castro is very strong. And if he does last into 2008 and January of 2009 and beyond, would you normalize relations with Cuba?
No, not unless he made, or whoever was then the head of government in Cuba, made significant changes in the way that they treated their own people, and I think that has to be a precondition.
Thank you very much, Senator. Senator Dodd, very quickly. Very quickly.
Peace Corps in the Dominican Republic and spent a lot of time on Latin American issues. Have chaired the committee of the Foreign Relations Committee for the last 26 years dealing with Latin America. I think we're making a huge mistake by not normalizing relations with Cuba. The only one who's benefited from this, in my view, the only one who's benefited is Fidel Castro here. This is outrageous in my view. If you want to create change in the country, as we did with Eastern Bloc countries here, this is the way is to allow travel to occur. This is the only country in the world where Americans are not allowed to travel there because our country prohibits them from going there. That's how you create change in these countries here. This embargo has done nothing but keep Fidel Castro in power. I think we ought to abandon the embargo, open up travel restrictions, and you'll create change immediately, in my view, in Cuba.
Okay. Very quickly, for the sake of fairness, another very quick yes/no question. Normalize relations with Cuba just down the line, starting with you.
Without respect to what's happening with Castro?
Irregardless.
No. No, not unless and until something has happened with Castro.
Yes.
Representative Kucinich.
Yes.
Senator Biden.
We have to reach out to the Cuban people right now because he's not going to last no matter what you say. And the bottom line is we have to have a plan. There is no plan. Chris is right. You've got to normalize relations with him eventually. And it seems to me that's going to come very quickly.
Normalize relations whether or not Fidel Castro is in power.
Not as long as he, in fact, has his human rights policy, but you got to compete with it.
Thank you. Senator Obama.
No, but there are two things we can do right now to prepare for that, and that is loosen travel restrictions for family members, Cuban Americans who want to visit, and open up remittances so that they are able to support family members, many of them who are fighting for their liberty in Cuba right now.
For now,
and I would not normalize relations, but those two things, those two shifts in policy would send a signal that we can build on once Castro's out of power.
Very quickly, Governor Richardson.
Michelle is the only Brown member in this debate. Is there any chance we could have civil rights equity and have the Brown guy get a little more time?
When you put it like that.
This is what Cuba, you always want to get something in return. The embargo has not worked. In return for lifting the embargo, there have to be some democratic reforms, release of political prisoners in Cuba, but we should stop preventing Cuban Americans from going back and forth with family visits. We should, in addition to that, permit remittances that are not taking place. But most importantly, we should send a signal to Latin America, as we should to Africa, that we care about the third world, that we care about problems that relate to the relationship with our southern hemisphere, that we care deeply about the fact that Hugo Chavez has more influence than we do because we're not paying enough attention to the region, that we need creative trade relations, that we need renewable energy ties with Latin America, that we also need to make sure that we resolve the immigration issue, which affects not just Mexico, but Central America and the Caribbean and the whole hemisphere.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Next, we're going to take a question from students from the community. Marisa, come on over. You're a student here at North High School?
Yes, I am. I'm a senior.
Tell us your question and direct it to one of our panel.
Okay, my question's for Senator Obama. All of us are trying to attend college, but not a lot of us can afford it. How are you going to make college education affordable?
Well, thanks for the question, Marissa, because this is a priority. We're going to do a couple of things. Number one, I am going to put in place a $4,000 per year tax credit for every student. Every student that wants to go to school, they're going to get that tax credit if they need it, and that will pay for a big chunk of both a community college or a four-year university. The second thing is national service. Allowing people, we need teachers, we need nurses, we need police officers, we need linguists who are going to go into the foreign service. We need you to be helping to build the country. And so if you are willing, for example, to teach in a school that needs you, then we will make sure that we're paying for your college education in order to facilitate you doing that. Now, but here's what we have to do, is there has to be a sense of urgency about this, because you've got young people right now coming out of school with $27,000, $50,000, $75,000 worth of debt, and we've got 200,000 young people who are not going to college, even though they're qualified, simply because they can't afford it. That's not the way to build a better America. That's not how it's going to be when I'm President of the United States.
Marisa, thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Clinton. Senator Clinton, you recently got a lot of attention for an answer you gave concerning driver's licenses. Probably a lot more attention than you were counting on when you gave the answer. Now, when I was digging around, I found something that shocked me, which is that vehicular accidents are one of the #1 causes of death for Latino young men. I didn't know that. Now, when Governor Spitzer proposed that driver's license that was clearly marked to indicate that the person was not a citizen, was not here legally, but did know how to drive, wasn't that a way to ensure that young fellas behind the wheel, whether they're here legally or not, can satisfy the state that they live in, that they actually know what they're doing when they turn the key in the ignition?
Well, that was certainly one of the arguments he made in favor of his policy. But the real problem is that in the absence of comprehensive immigration reform, you're asking the state, you're asking officials of the state, like the people at the Department of Motor Vehicles, to in effect ratify someone who's not here legally as someone who is going to be given a privilege, a document from the state. And you know, it just didn't bear up under a lot of scrutiny, and he withdrew it. I think that was the right decision, because ultimately we've got to move toward comprehensive immigration reform. And if we permit there to be a diversion or a distraction, instead of keeping the pressure on for comprehensive immigration reform, I think we will be just playing into, unfortunately, the kind of demagoguery that has been going on around the issue of immigration reform. So I am very committed to comprehensive immigration reform. And then when people are on a path to legalization, certain privileges and rights and opportunities will be able to be afforded them. You know, you'll hear in this campaign, and you're already hearing it from the Republicans, kind of veiled or even explicit call to deport everyone. And there is no way, realistically, that makes any sense. And it's time to call them on it and put forth a comprehensive approach that is in keeping with the rule of law and our immigrant values.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Richardson, until that day when comprehensive immigration reform finally does arrive, and who knows when that might be, do you license people in your state based not on their status but on whether they know how to drive?
Yes, and the reason that my state took these steps is because of the failure of the Congress. I mean, all this talk about comprehensive immigration reform, which is terribly needed and which is causing tremendous anxiety and prejudice in this country, the fact is the Congress hasn't acted. And so states like my own need to take steps to assure the safety of our citizens. You cited that statistic. 4 years ago in my state, I signed a bill that gave licenses to undocumented workers. This is what happened. Insurance, uninsured went from 33% uninsured to 11. Traffic fatalities went down. My law enforcement people wanted me to sign this bill because of issues of road safety, of traffic safety. The rights of those that drive with licenses have to be protected too, and they don't want untrained drivers on the highway. So you have to be, you have to be practical. The answer is comprehensive immigration. But all I hear is this rhetoric, and I see a dysfunctional Congress with a dysfunctional president. They don't deal with the war in Iraq, they don't deal with education, they don't deal with health care. And so governors like Governor Culver and I have to deal with these issues directly because the Congress and the president don't act.
Governor, thanks a lot. Let's go to Michelle Norris.
Thank you, Ray. It's time again for one of the candidates to pose a question to another candidate of their choosing. This time, that candidate will be John Edwards.
Well, thank you. As we've already talked about tonight, the cause of ending poverty in America is a cause that's very central to what I want to do as president and central to my life. It is the cause of my life. And there is at least one other candidate on this stage who's also spoken strongly and eloquently about doing something about poverty in America, and it's Senator Obama. And I applaud him for having done that. I think our voices together are more powerful than our voices alone. And what's more important than either one of us is that our country actually address this issue of poverty in America. So my question to Senator Obama is, will you join me, and let me just say as a predicate, the Congress, who Bill was just speaking about, raise the minimum wage. It's going to go to $7.25 an hour. My question to Senator Obama is, will he commit with me to commit as President of the United States to push for raising the minimum wage to at least $9.50 an hour and have it indexed to go up on its own?
The answer is yes. And John has done good work on this, and let me just build on a couple of things that have been said previously, and John's mentioned this earlier. The biggest issue facing African American and Latino Americans is, how do we prevent a slide backwards for the next generation? How do we make sure that they are standing on our shoulders and have greater opportunity than the opportunity that we have? And as I said, although when America gets a cold, black and brown America get pneumonia, and we've got pneumonia right now, America's got a cold and we're moving in that direction, and we've got to do something about it. We've got to strengthen our unions. We have to raise the minimum wage and make sure it's not every 10 years, but it's keeping pace with inflation. It's got to be a livable wage. We also have to make sure that our tax policies are fixed. We've got CEOs who are making more in 10 minutes than most of the people here in this auditorium are making in an entire year. And yet George Bush gives them the tax breaks and you're left holding the bag. That is not fair. It is not just. And in order for us to close that opportunity gap, the wealth gap, and the income gap, what I've said is we're going to roll back tax cuts on those wealthy individuals at the top 1%. And we are going to provide tax relief to folks who are really struggling and working every single day so they can provide the opportunities for the children that they need.
All right. Thank you, Senator. Okay, hold on just a minute. Stay with me for just a minute. Before we go to our next question from a student, we have one more question that we're going to take from a candidate. That candidate, we're just going to move to my right, to Representative Kucinich. You're up. Your question. You choose which candidate.
The candidate that I have a question to is Congressman Kucinich. Congressman Kucinich. Yeah. I thought I'd get him in the question period here. And Congressman Kucinich, is it true that you're the only one sitting up here? Oh yeah. Is it true that you're the only one sitting up here who advocates a universal, single-payer, not-for-profit health care system, which would result in all 46 million Americans who are not insured and another 50 million Americans who are underinsured for being covered? And the answer to that question is, it is true that I'm the only one up here. It is true that I'm the only one up here who advocates a single-payer, not-for-profit health care system called Medicare for All. I'm the co-author of the bill. It is time that we see health care as a basic right in a democratic society, not as a privilege based on ability to pay. My plan recognizes that $1 out of every $3 today goes for the activities of the for-profit system. It is time that we declared that health care is a basic right in a democratic society, and I'm asking all of my friends up here to join me in that so the American people will be the winners of this election. Thank you.
Representative Kucinich, thank you for that singular experience. Thank you
Ask me
very
another
much.
question.
We'll get back to you. We now have a question from a student here at North High. Tell us who you are and tell us who you're going to pose your question to.
My name is Laura Townsley, and I'm asking this to Senator Biden. The achievement gap for African American and Hispanic students continues to get bigger. What we students were wondering was, how do you plan on working to close this gap and so children don't fall behind throughout their education?
Start from the beginning. Half that gap exists before a minority child or from a disadvantaged home, minority or otherwise, sets foot in the first classroom. So I call for spending a total of $9 billion a year, which is less than 1 month in Iraq, to provide for tripling pre-Head Start, in other words, 4 years old, doubling Head Start. Secondly, I call for adding 100,000 new teachers so we have smaller classes, because the smaller the class, the better the outcome. Thirdly, I call for incentivizing the states by providing $3 billion to raise their minimum starting salary for teachers to $40,000 a year. And lastly, my numbers are 2 million people will qualify to go to college in the next 4 years. 2 million. And I've proposed a very simple solution. For $11 billion a year, we can guarantee that every child in a household under $50,000, by moving Pell Grants to $6,300 and having a refundable tax credit, that means if you pay no taxes, you get $3,000 in cash, is available, so every kid would have $9,600 to go to school, and every family up to $150,000 a year would have a $3,000 refundable tax credit for every child, guaranteeing the whole package, $30 billion, a lot of money, but it's the single most important domestic thing we can do.
Thank you. And thank you. Before we let you go, you're in what year?
I'm a senior.
And where do you want to go to college?
I would like to go to the University of Iowa.
Good luck to you.
Thank you.
Good luck. Thank you. Now to Ray.
Thanks, Michelle. And if you realize that dream, waiting for you at the University of Iowa will be our next expert questioner, Dean Adrian Wing, who is from the University of Iowa College of Law. Dean Wing.
Thank you. My question is for Senator Clinton. Because of the many billions that are being spent in the Iraq War, we do not have the resources right now to address many domestic priorities, including priorities that would affect people of color, indeed people of all colors. Assuming that we will continue to have some involvement in Iraq, Afghanistan, and possibly other foreign countries, would you be in favor of raising taxes to meet these expenses as well as to meet our various domestic priorities?
Well, first of all, I'm going to end the war in Iraq as quickly and responsibly as I can, and that money will then be freed up for us to begin investing once again in our own country. Secondly, I think it's been a historic crisis that we have had with this president, that as far as I know, he's the first president ever to take our country to war and refuse to pay for it. And I think that has been just unbelievably irresponsible and reckless. As we end the war in Iraq, we're going to have to take stock of what investments we need to make in our country, in healthcare, in education, in a clean energy future, in dealing with a lot of the disparities that we've been talking about. I think that we can do that in a way that moves toward a balanced budget and a surplus if we do not permit the wealthiest of Americans to continue to have the tax breaks that George Bush has given them. So I intend to make sure they don't. And we'll begin to be able to fund the kind of priorities that I have set forth in this campaign. Every priority I've put forth, I tell you how I will pay for it, and I think we can get back on the right track fiscally, as well as, once again, representing our values and priorities.
That's time, Senator, but I just want to clarify one thing. You're saying you would repeal the tax cuts that were passed in the first George W. Bush administration?
If we had the votes to do it, otherwise we'd have to wait till they expired. But I'd like to more quickly begin to get back to some tax equity and fairness, because it's been so tilted toward the wealthiest and most privileged under George Bush.
Thank you, Senator. Our next candidate-to-candidate question is going to be asked by Governor Bill Richardson of New Mexico. Governor Richardson, your candidate-to-candidate question.
I'd like to ask Senator Clinton a question. Like me, her husband, President Clinton, was a CEO and was a successful CEO and was a successful president. He balanced the budget like I did in New Mexico. He created new jobs. And my question to Senator Clinton is, don't you think that governors make good presidents? And that's it. And I'd like to yield the rest of my time to supplement your answer.
Well, Bill, I think they also make good vice presidents.
Governor, aren't you sorry you asked?
No. Ray, you know, the reality, look.
Very quickly.
Very quick. Look, I'm the only CEO in this race. 7 out of the last 8 presidents or have been governors or ex-governors. You know, with all due respect, we're talking about issues that require balancing the budget, managing, leading. I have to, in my state, in the absence of inaction by the federal government, take the steps that the American people need. And so I'm making a case, obviously, for CEOs being presidents, governors.
Thank you, Governor. We go for our next question to the panel, to a member of the Iowa Commission on Latino Affairs, the Honorable Angel Gonzalez.
Good evening. My question is for Senator Obama. Senator Obama, you just recently visited Puerto Rico. And I want to talk to you about that for a second and ask you a question. The island of Puerto Rico became a U.S. territory under the Treaty of Paris, which ended the Spanish-American War in 1898. For over 100 years, the status of Puerto Rico has been a subject of bitter debate. In 1917, the Jones Act granted the people of Puerto Rico U.S. statutory citizenship. In 1952, the U.S. Congress and President Truman ratified the Constitution of Puerto Rico when it became a Commonwealth of the United States. The people of Puerto Rico are subject to U.S. laws and Constitution, but have no vote in Congress and are unable to vote for the President of the United States, who has drafted them repeatedly for conflicts throughout the world. Would you support the Puerto Rican people's claim for statehood or independence, which results from a congressionally sanctioned referendum and constitutional convention, such as proposed by H.R. 900?
Well, this is a major debate that's taking place, obviously, in Puerto Rico. And not all the people of Puerto Rico are of one accord on this issue. Some are supporting statehood, some support complete independence, some want to preserve current status. What I am committed to doing as president is making sure that we have a process so that the people of Puerto Rico can make a decision, so that they have a referendum that actually allows them to make a decision about which way they want to go. But in the meantime, one of the things that I saw when I visited Puerto Rico is the fact that they are still burdened by a series of double standards when it comes to the islands that are very difficult to deal with. For example, they don't get the same reimbursements on Medicaid, despite the fact that they have the same requirements to provide coverage. And so they're losing billions of dollars each and every year in a population that obviously is already underinsured or uninsured. Those are the kinds of things that I want to immediately partner with the Puerto Rican government when I am president, with the governor's office there. But I also want to make sure that there's a process that can immediately move forward so that they can make a decision about their future.
Senator Obama, thank you. Let's go back to Michelle Norris.
Thank you, Ray. It's time for another question from one of the candidates. This time we're going to hear from Senator Joe Biden. Your turn.
My question is simple. Will everyone on this stage support my proposal to eliminate any disparity between crack cocaine and powdered cocaine? None. No disparity, 1-to-1. That's the bill I have in the Senate.
Yes.
Actually, yes.
Yes. Yes. Verbal answer. Yes.
Great.
I didn't.
We ought to win.
Senator, I didn't hear you. Is that a yes? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to now continue with our questions. This question is for Senator Obama. Would you dismantle or continue the Office of Faith-Based Initiatives? And I'm going to repeat that because I think someone said they didn't hear that. This is a question for Senator Obama. Would you dismantle or continue with the Office of Faith-Based Initiatives?
I would completely revamp it as it's currently set up. And the reason is this. Faith-based institutions are critical, and obviously in the African American church tradition, this has been the single source of independence. It's been the bedrock for social advancement, economic advancement, as well as religious advancement and political advancement. And so there's no doubt that we can use the faith-based institutions that exist in our society for all sorts of good. But the reason we set up separation of church and state, the reason the founders set it up, was not just to protect the state from the church, it was to protect the church from the state. And what we have seen, unfortunately, under this administration is the use all too often of faith-based initiatives to essentially control the political agenda, and that weakens the prophetic voice of the church. So what I want to be able to do is to partner and work with faith-based institutions, but there are ways of doing it that don't violate the separation of church and state. There are ways of making sure that if a church-based organization or a religious institution is setting up a social program, that it is open to everybody and that it is serving the entire community. That's something that I definitely am committed to.
Thank you. This question is for Senator Biden. We have heard from top leaders in the Pentagon that the U.S. military is stretched to its limit, perhaps beyond its limit. If the U.S. continues to face threats or aggressors in the future, under what circumstances would you consider reinstituting a draft? And would that be a more equitable way to make sure that that sacrifice was spread evenly throughout society?
I would not reinstitute the draft. I would end the war in Iraq, which is the thing that's straining the entire system. I would add 30,000 people to the end strength of the United States military while still cutting over 4 years $800 billion from the Pentagon budget. I would also point out that I'm the only one on this stage, the only one in the country who's laid out a distinct, precise plan how to leave Iraq without leaving chaos behind, getting 75 votes in the United States Congress and getting overwhelming support from the international community and most of the foreign policy establishment by setting up a federal state which their Constitution calls for. If we do that, we'll be able to withdraw without having to send our grandkids back. And so the way to deal with this is to deal with the breaking of the military now by ending this war without having to commit troops to a larger war.
Senator Biden, thank you. Very quickly.
You know, maybe Joe isn't aware that 4 years ago, right after the invasion, I laid out a plan to get out of Iraq. And the plan is 1234, HR 1234, the plan to end the Iraq war, close the bases, bring the troops home, end the occupation, and only by ending the occupation and having an international peacekeeping and security force that moves in as our troops leave, can we successfully get out of Iraq? And I'm ready to do that.
Who is possibly going to move in? This is ridiculous. Who is going to possibly move into Iraq
are you planning to stay there through 2013?
No, I'm planning to turn it over to who's going to move in.
If you go to the international community and you reach out to them,
I have.
And you no, you haven't.
I have.
If you go to the international community, my plan will work.
I've met with the Security Council. I've met with the President.
Have you read my plan?
No, I've not even aware of your plan.
Read it.
You know, Representative Kucinich, maybe you should have asked your question to Senator Biden, but we have to stop there. This question is for Senator Dodd, and I want to ask you a question about education. Because we are here in a high school, we are going to be hearing from a student again momentarily. Many people in this country who grew up in integrated schools and neighborhoods are finding it difficult to give that same experience to their own children, because across the country we're seeing a resegregation of schools and communities. What would you do as president to change or halt or amend this trend, this resegregation of schools and communities? And would you call upon the Justice Department to step in?
Well, we had a recent case, in fact, a major setback for our country, in my view, setback the Brown versus Board of Education, the Kentucky case. I think there were several cases, but the Kentucky case, the Jefferson County case, was the one that was most poignant, where they decided, the Supreme Court, by the narrowest of margins, that racial considerations should not be applied when deciding whether or not to include different ethnic groups and racial groups in schools. It was a major setback. After more than 50 years of Brown versus Board of Education, improving slowly with all the difficulties we faced, to have the Supreme Court reach that decision. The next president, and I hope to be that president, needs to reverse that idea. I'm a firm believer that affirmative action works, and it works very, very well. And I've been asked over and over again, how does it work? How do you define affirmative action? Affirmative action is when someone tells you you can't find anyone, try again. Work harder at it. Do it again. Try again. When I was asked to nominate the first federal judge during my tenure in the Senate, I nominated an African American for the first time in the history of my state, I'm embarrassed to say, in Connecticut, and nominated as well the first African American U.S. attorney in my state, because I believe you reach out, you make that effort. I think we deprive our children tremendously in this country if we don't provide them with the opportunity to have that educational benefit of working and living with people of different races, colors, and ethnic groups. That's a major setback for our country. And the American president, utilizing the bully pulpit of the Oval Office, needs to make that case every single day if we're going to succeed in this effort.
Thank you, Senator. My good friend Ray.
Thanks, Michelle. Let's bring up another one of our student questioners. An Ho is a senior at North High School, where we are tonight. An, welcome.
My question is to Senator Clinton, that there are immigrants who taking jobs that some American doesn't want, and there are now some Americans saying that we're taking their jobs. So how will your immigration policy help us immigrants succeed and gain equal opportunity?
Well, I'm glad to see that you're a student here, and I think obviously it's important that we look at this from a broad perspective. First, we have as much controversy and conflict over immigration today in part because the economy is not working for average Americans. During the 1990s, when we saw the creation of 22.7 new jobs, 22.7 million new jobs, there wasn't this kind of anxiety. People are worried about losing their jobs, about their children's future. So what we've got to do is get the economy moving again, move toward comprehensive immigration reform, and make sure that we don't let any employers exploit anybody. Part of the reason there's this feeling that somehow jobs are being taken is because, frankly, a lot of employers are very happy to pay less than the minimum wage, pay less than the prevailing wage, and they then get a good deal for them, but it's not a good deal either for the workers or for the people whose jobs were displaced. So this has to be approached in a very broad, aggressive way. And as president, that's what I intend to do. Because I think we don't need this conflict. I believe that if we moved people on a path toward legalization, then there wouldn't be this conflict because employers couldn't exploit them any longer. So that's what I intend to do as president.
Thank you, Senator. I'd like to quickly follow up with Senator Biden. Do you believe that, as An Ho suggested, we're talking about jobs that Americans won't do? That's often used as a conversation point in this debate over immigration.
Let's get straight. Americans will do any job if you pay them properly. You know, the fact of the matter is, that doesn't mean we don't need guest workers. We do. That doesn't mean we don't need, but we should base the number of guest workers that are in the statute that we're trying to pass, and we tried to pass before comprehensive immigration reform, based upon need, not on an absolute number. And we should require employers to offer those jobs to citizens to see if they want those jobs. Case in point, you had Swift Meats down in North Carolina. INS came in, 800 people took off. The fact of the matter is they had to go out and hire people. Guess what? They had to double the wage and provide health insurance. They got all the North Carolinians they want to come and slit pigs' throats, which no one wants to do. They did it. And so that doesn't mean there's not room. We need agricultural workers. We need H-1B visas. We need what, in fact, exists as a need, not as an artificial number to allow employers to drive down wages.
Well, earlier in this panel, it was suggested that hiring illegal immigrants to do these jobs doesn't drive down wages. So I'm interested to hear the Senator go to
I think it
Lebanon.
drives down wages. I think it drove down wages at Swift Meats. What happened? When 800 out of 2,800 people left, they had to go out and say, okay, now we'll pay $10.50 an hour instead of $6 an hour, or whatever the number was. And we're going to give health insurance. And guess what? North Carolinians showed up for the jobs. Now, granted, the rate that they dropped the job is about 57% versus 46%. I know it's your home state, John, but I mean, that's what happened. There's a lot of people who will go out and hang drywall and get a decent wage. There are not a lot of people who are going to go out and do the agricultural work that's seasonal. So it should be based on need.
Let's go to our expert panel again, Dr. Juan Andrade.
Thank you, Ray. And my question is to Senator Edwards. At the end of the next president's first term, states like Iowa will have a shortage of 150,000 workers in its labor force. This is kind of two questions in one. This at a time when thousands of immigrants are being rounded up at the workplace and even in private homes, and many are being subsequently deported. Do you believe a moratorium on raids is needed? And what would you do as president to help states like Iowa meet its labor force needs?
Well, first of all, I think these raids, and particularly the way they're being conducted, separating parents from children, just on Thanksgiving Day, or actually the day before Thanksgiving, my kids and I went to work at a local food bank, and a woman came through and told me the story of her husband, who we're actually trying to help now, but her husband, who had lived in the United States of America for 17 years, they had 4 children. She had serious health problems, and they had stopped him, arrested him, detained him, sent him to Georgia, and they're sending him home. And I think the bottom line is that what we need is we need to change the law and reform the laws for immigration in this country so that everybody has a real and meaningful path to citizenship. But I want to tag on just very quickly to something that Senator Biden spoke about a few minutes ago. A few months ago, I made a poverty tour that began in New Orleans and went through Mississippi and other places. And I was in Canton, Mississippi, meeting with poultry workers at a poultry plant where they had been abused in a way that most Americans would never understand. A man had broken his back, Senator, and they said it was his degenerative condition that caused it. Broken his back on the job. And they were being taken advantage of every single time they raised a question about not being paid for the work they did, or not being treated fairly, or working in unsafe conditions. What was the first question? What's your immigration status? This is how these employers treat workers. And not only that, Senator, we have a grand total of four bilingual federal workers who are responsible for the enforcement of our fair labor laws. 4 for the entire United States of America.
Thank you,
What do you think the chances are that these people's rights are being looked after? They are not. They will be when I'm President of the United States.
Senator, thank you. We'll move on next to our next candidate-to-candidate question. And Senator Clinton, it's your turn.
Well, today is World AIDS Day. And I think it's important on this particular night that we recognize, I believe all of us have committed to supporting $50 billion for global AIDS relief, which I am very committed to and very excited about. But let's not forget that AIDS now is growing again in our own country, particularly among African American and Latina women. And as I have said before, the leading cause of death for African American women between the ages of 25 and 34 is AIDS. So I want to ask all of my fellow candidates here if they would join me not only in a pledge for what we're going to do globally to address the AIDS pandemic in Africa and Asia and elsewhere, but will you join me in a pledge that we're going to do everything we can once again to address the AIDS pandemic right here in the United States of America, and to put the money in that will provide the services and the treatment and the prevention that our own people deserve to have, because frankly, we have turned our back, we have frozen the amount of money, and I am very worried about what is happening to countless numbers of Americans when it comes to HIV and AIDS.
The answer is yes. In 1991, I was original co-sponsor of the Ryan White Act. We put $24 billion in. It wasn't popular to do it then. We should be doing a great deal more, and it comes down to a simple proposition. You have to have education, prevention, and you got to provide medical services and medication.
Thank you. Very quickly.
Yes, I believe that if we have a not-for-profit healthcare system which has long-term care and pays for pharmaceuticals, the people with AIDS will get the care they need, and I would ask you, Senator Clinton, to join me in that.
Okay, quickly.
I think the most staggering statistic is this, recent. 50% of all new AIDS cases are African American. 19% are Latino. That is a huge, dramatic change, a dramatic increase. We need a Marshall Plan domestically to deal with this issue, and it's outreach, it's screening, it's funding for AIDS research. It is also an all-out effort in our cities to deal with this pandemic disease that is destroying this country. I would make my vice president the chairman of the HIV/AIDS Commission to give it the bureaucratic strength that this issue deserves. You have to elevate it within the bureaucracy.
Thank you, Governor. Our next question, Senator Obama. The Federal Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality recently reported that both Latinos and blacks receive significantly worse medical care than whites in the United States when they get care. 1 out of 3 Hispanics, 1 out of 5 black Americans is uninsured. Hispanics are 2.5 times as likely as a non-Hispanic white American to be uninsured. 1 of 3 Latinos in the United States hasn't been to the doctor in more than a year. Diabetes, asthma, hypertension are untreated or undertreated in communities across America. What can the president do to address this, and can we afford it?
The president can do everything to address this and can afford it if we are able to bring people together to get it done. And this is something that I'm committed to doing as president. Look, it is indisputable that if you are poor in this country, that is hazardous to your health. If you are black or brown and poor, it can be downright deadly for all the statistics that you cited. And that is why we have to create a comprehensive healthcare program that is available to all people who need it. And I have put forward a plan that says that every single person can buy into a plan that is as good as the healthcare that I have as a member of Congress, that we will emphasize preventive care, and we will emphasize the reduction of disparities in that care. Because right now we've got, what we know is that even when blacks or Latinos have the same quality of care, or have the same health insurance as whites do, that they're not receiving the same quality of care. And that means that we've got to have more black and brown doctors and nurses. We've got to have done studies in terms of making sure that we are eliminating these disparities. We've got to make sure that we are doing outreach in these communities ahead of time to prevent disease. Those are all things that are part of the plan that I've put together, and it is one of my #1 priorities as President of the United States.
Senator, thank you very much. We'll go back to our panel. Professor Adrienne Wing. Dean Wing? Yes, you're next.
This is a question for Governor Richardson. The dollar is so weak internationally that some black rappers are even flashing euros in their music videos now. What should be done, if anything, to restore global confidence in the dollar, and how would those measures affect people of color in the United States?
Well, America has lost its economic leadership. We have a $9 trillion debt. We've got a weakening dollar. We've got jobs going overseas. These are the steps that I would take as president. What is going to be key is fiscal discipline. I am for a constitutional amendment to balance the budget within a 5 to 6 year period. We have to balance that budget. This debt is to commercial banks, to China, to India. I'm for a line item veto. We need to have investments also in science and technology. I would take the new industries of the future, biomedical, solar, wind, biomass. I would invest in those new industries. This is what I did in my state to create 80,000 new jobs. Give a tax incentive for increasing the prevailing wage. That's a second step that I would take. Invest in science and technology and industries of the future. The third would be invest in education, invest in kids and science and technology, and in America not graduating substantially fewer engineers than China and India. It's a competitiveness issue. It's paying our teachers better. It's making sure that we have a competitive economy. And I believe to upgrade ourselves, again, I'm going to make this point, in science and math. What we did in my state, creating substantial art in the schools programs to boost the science and math proficiency of our kids, will work, music, dance, sculpture. This is the kind of investment we need to make. Fiscal discipline. Number two, science and technology. Invest in the new industries of the future. And third, invest in education. That's how America will regain its economic leadership.
Thank you. Thank you, Governor. I'm going to pose this question to Senator Dodd, and as the chairman of the Banking Committee, perhaps you will appreciate my request for a dollar figure that goes along with your answer. In looking at the continuing recovery in Katrina, it's clear that that region, not just the continuing recovery after Katrina, it's clear that New Orleans and the entire Gulf Coast region needs a great deal of assistance from the federal government. The question is, what kind of attention and assistance will they get over the long term? In thinking about some sort of, you've used the term Marshall Plan before. If you're talking about putting together an action plan to help the Gulf Coast recover, what is the dollar amount that you attach to that plan?
Well, it's a good question. The dollar amount, whatever it takes in my view, is what we ought to be doing. This is disgraceful. This is a great American city, part of our country. We're spending $10 billion a month on a war in Iraq, and yet we find we aren't funding all the things we need to do in this country. And having watched what happened under this administration, when a great American city faced that natural disaster, and still people living in trailers, and Ward 9 down there, people are still suffering terribly every day. So I can't put a dollar number for you on. I can tell you what we're doing here. Mary Landrieu and I have legislation right now to deal with housing, trying to get it out of the Banking Committee on the floor of the United States Senate so we can start to make a difference in that area, in one area of jurisdiction that I'm responsible for. We've watched 40,000 people leave that city, not coming back. So whatever the investment it takes, in my view, to get that city back on its feet again in the Gulf State is what we ought to be prepared to do as a country here, as a nation here.
Why can't you put a dollar amount on it?
Well, because I don't know what the dollar amount is. We're talking, what, 50, 30, $60 billion maybe, more, to make this happen, make this work. It's housing issues, it's job creation, it's seeing to it that we have a federal emergency management agency that's actually doing a job when future hurricanes come through that area again, so we can put it on a solid footing again. We've walked away from a major part of this country here, and that to me is a disgrace. That is the shame of this administration, of not stepping up and doing what was necessary to do it, to put people back whole again in their very communities. They've had to leave. They've had to pack up and leave their communities where they've lived for generations in some cases. That should never, ever happen in any part of this country, and particularly in that part of the country. And a lot of it was because, frankly, it was poor people of color. In my view, it had been other parts of the country where they're not people of color, I think you would have seen a larger response from a Bush administration. They didn't do it here in part because of what it was.
Thank you, Senator. I would like to pose that same question to Governor Richardson. In thinking about the needs of the Gulf Coast, post-Katrina, the continuing needs, if you're putting together an action plan to help that region recover, what is the dollar amount that you would attach to that plan?
We shouldn't be talking dollars. We should be talking a massive commitment on the part of the U.S. government that we're never going to let this happen again. And this means a commitment to ensure that people get their insurance companies pay for the homes that have been lost, that we give preference to those that have left Katrina. It means bureaucratic changes like having FEMA directly under the president. It means also taking steps like appointing people that are competent to deal with natural disasters. It means also there's a law in the Congress that Representative Maxine Waters has proposed that I support that I don't know if it has a dollar figure, but it's a commitment that involves the U.S. government in all its strength, recognizing that this is something that can never happen again. And it's not just a matter of rebuilding and making those levees functional again. It isn't meaning making sure that those homes come back to the people that owned them. It means saying that as a country, you cannot let the American people down without a commitment that we will put all our resources to prevent this from happening again.
Thank you. Thank you, Governor. We are going to go to our distinguished panel and take another question from Ben Chavez.
Yes, thank you. This is for Senator Clinton. This is an economic development question. A lot of what we discussed on the forum so far has been about some of the issues about the quality of life, and again, the discrimination, the disparity. And one of the most heart-wrenching experiences is economic inequality in our communities, in the black and brown communities. Hip-hop has brought back among youth a return of the entrepreneurial spirit. When the dean made reference to rappers wanting euros, they own their own businesses. And their product is not only demanded in the United States, but all over the world. Hip-hop is a global cultural phenomenon where young people not only own their own labels, their own production companies, own fashion companies. We're building hip-hop soda shops around the world. So, Senator Clinton, if you're elected president, what leadership would you take to ensure that young people in Latino and black communities not only have access to capital, but to ensure the economic development, the entrepreneur development of America, being more inclusive of black and brown youth?
Well, first of all, let me thank and congratulate you and my friend Russell Simmons for what you've done with the Hip Hop Summit, because it's been a very important way to highlight a lot of these issues. In New York City, we have seen the transformation of Harlem from a combination of government action, creating an empowerment zone, the private sector coming in to take advantage of that, and an explosion of entrepreneurial dynamism. We've also seen the faith-based community like Abyssinian and others that have been partners with it. And of course, we've seen a lot of hip-hop participants and leaders taking advantage of that. So we need this partnership. We need this partnership between the public and private sector and the not-for-profit and faith-based sector. And we need to make sure that young people have a particular stake in what we're going to present. So I'm going to do everything I can to make the tools of government work again, like the Small Business Administration, which has frankly been missing in action the last 7 years. They've turned their back on black and brown entrepreneurs and business owners, looking for ways to get back into the business of tax incentives like the Empowerment Zone and others, and to create more credit through things like microfinancing and consulting and technical assistance. I think we can see this happen all over America, and not just urban America, but rural America too. That's what I've worked on in New York, both in the city and in upstate, and I intend to put that to work when I'm president.
Senator Clinton, thank you. Ben Chavez, thank you for the question. It's time for another candidate-to-candidate question. And this time that question will come from Senator Barack Obama.
Well, a lot of what we've talked about today obviously has to do with structural inequalities, economics, but it also has to do with racial attitudes in this country. When we were talking earlier about the situation with immigrants, and many have remarked, and they're exactly right, that if you watch the Republican debates, you can see how this issue is being demagogued. There is a consequence to that, which is that hate crimes against Latinos have gone way up over the last year. We've also seen over the last several months this epidemic of nooses being hung all across the country. Since Gina the events down in Gina, Louisiana. And it indicates the degree to which a president has to set a tone of bringing all people together as opposed to excluding people, and being willing to talk about racial issues when they arise, and having a Justice Department, a civil rights division of the Justice Department that is aggressive about investigating. But there's one last point that I'm going to, I know it's supposed to be a question. It's going to Joe. And that is this, a wide coalition of people from Reverend Sharpton to the Anti-Defamation League have come together around hate crimes legislation. I know you have been working on this for quite some time. We need to strengthen the enforcement of hate crimes legislation. There's some work being done right now in the House that is pending, and just wanted to get your perspective. This is something that's very important to me as a member of the Judiciary Committee. Can we move this forward? It is something that I will prioritize as president, but I don't want to have to wait until I am.
Well, by the way, we can and we should move it forward. The impediment right now is the president. Senator Kennedy and I and 38 other co-sponsors, you're a co-sponsor as well, have been pushing this, the funding. Look, the bottom line here is, it all gets down. For example, I blocked a Delawarean from being the head of the Civil Rights Division when I was chairman of the Judiciary Committee, to get Deval Patrick, an endorser and supporter of yours. We need someone in the Civil Rights Division who is aggressive, and we need a Justice Department that's aggressive in going after these hate crimes. I would not wait. Why did we not hear immediately from the Justice Department in the Gina 8? Why did we not hear immediately when the rash of burnings took place? Why did we not hear? The reason is they're not committed. Hate crimes are just that, the vilest and filthiest of crimes. And when you let one celebrated hate crime go unattended, you generate an attitude. And I'll conclude by saying that's why, if you notice in my immigration answer, the first thing I said is you've got to take the sting out of this. The majority of people undocumented are not Spanish-speaking people taking people's jobs. That's the start. Tell the truth, prosecute. Have this Justice Department and a civil rights head, and I'd be happy to make you the head of the Civil Rights Division with me as President of the United States of America.
Senator Biden,
no, but it's serious.
Thank you. Governor Richardson, you had a follow there. Very quickly.
Yes, and it is very quick. And I would suggest, and Senator Biden has been a leader in this issue, that there is one gap in that bill that goes from the House to the Senate, and it involves hate crimes that relate to sexual orientation, transgender. It was not included in the House. Now, this is not popular. I mean, I did it 4 years ago in my state, a red state, but if we're going to be thorough about ensuring that there is no discrimination on the basis of race, gender, or sexual orientation, it should include all people, and I would hope you'd consider including that in the Senate bill, too.
I have a question for Senator Clinton. In the time that I've been in Iowa, I've had a chance to drive through the neighborhood and stop in some of the eateries and the beauty shops and the barber shops, the markets, and talk to people where they move about. And I want to put to you one of the things that I've actually heard on the street here surrounding North High School. Some people say that your husband's crime bill is one of the primary factors behind the rising incarceration rate for blacks and Latinos. It earmarked $8 billion for prisons and continue to trend toward harsh or harsher sentencing. How do you view that, and what do you say to people who sit in a barber chair and scratch their heads over this? Do you regret in any way how this has affected the black community, or do you stand by that?
Well, I think that the results, not only at the federal level, but at the state level, has been just an unacceptable increase in incarceration across the board, and now we have to address that. Just as you can go in retrospective and say, well, why was this happening at the time? And there were reasons why the Congress wanted to push through a certain set of penalties and increase prison construction. And there was a lot of support for that across a lot of communities, because it's hard to remember now, but the crime rate in the early 90s was very high, and people were being victimized by crime in their homes, in their neighborhoods, in their businesses. But we've got to take stock now of the consequences, so that's why I want to have a thorough review of all of the penalties, of all the kinds of sentencing that's done, and more importantly, start having more diversion and having more second chance programs and really investing in young people. I put forth a youth opportunity agenda that will keep people out of prison and keep them out of that revolving door, and that's what I'm going to focus on when I'm president.
Senator Clinton, thank you.
I'd like the next question to go to Senator Dodd, but I'd also like to hear from other members of the panel of candidates about it. Recently in my house, a young Latino turned 18. And when he did, he heard from the federal government, he got his postcard telling them that in no uncertain terms, that in a certain number of days, he had to make himself known to the government, register for selective service in case of the need for a call-up. Now, I have another teenager, as a matter of fact, she's sitting in the audience tonight, who is going to turn 18 before too long, but she's not going to hear from the government in that way. And I'm wondering whether this sends the right message about national service, what it means to be called up when your country needs you, and whether we ought to re-examine how we go about telling young people, asking young people, for their service to the country. Senator?
Well, it's a great question, and I think I'm the only candidate here who's actually articulated a large national service program. I mentioned earlier that I served in the Peace Corps back in the 1960s, and I did so. I've been asked 1,000 times over the last 41 years, why did I join the Peace Corps? The very simple answer I've given 1,000 times is because an American president asked me to. He invited a generation of us to be involved in things larger than ourselves. Some involved in the civil rights movement, the farm workers movement, went with the military, the Justice Department, but we all felt we were giving something back and making a difference. I think earlier Joe or someone answered the question on the draft. I don't see a need for the draft. I don't believe that's necessary. But if you're going to have one, I think it ought to be gender neutral. If we're going to do that, then I think all young people ought to be drawn in. We don't make separations, in my view. But I do want to articulate the idea here that we ought to expand the opportunities. I would take AmeriCorps from 150,000 slots to 1 million slots here and connect it with affordability of college education. Retirees who have so much to offer, I think, are willing to be asked again to participate in the community. Compare, if you will, what John Kennedy invited a generation of us to do not that long ago, and consider what this president asked us to do in the wake of 9/11 here. What was the question? Go shopping, in a sense. It was a remarkable statement to make when you consider how willing people were, not only in this country and elsewhere, to be involved in the effort of rebuilding our country, taking it back again. So I'm a strong believer here. I believe we ought to do what Maryland has done. Maryland has a requirement that every high school student, before you graduate, commit 100 hours of public service in your community. I'd like that to be a part of every community in this country here, to learn the habit of giving, the idea of giving something back to your community. Developing that idea, developing that habit, I think can carry you through life, and we're richer for it. So I'm a very strong advocate of universal national service, not requiring it, but extending that invitation that people be involved in being a part of things larger than themselves.
Thank you, Senator Dodd. Let me say, everybody wants to jump in on this question, but let me just refine it just briefly and get very quick hits from the rest of the panel. If it did not necessarily mean military service, and if it did not necessarily mean combat service, should the country examine registering women at 18 as well? And I'll go from left to right. Senator Clinton?
Yes.
Senator Edwards?
Is this yes, no?
Yeah, well, we're kind of pressed for time.
Yeah, yes, the answer is yes, but can I just say a 15-second follow-up? I do think that it's absolutely crucial that we ask Americans to be patriotic about something other than war, to ask Americans to be willing to take the action that makes this country what it's capable of being. Chris spoke about John Kennedy. I think we need a president who asks Americans to sacrifice.
Congressman Kucinich?
I think we need to move this country away from militarism and away from war as an instrument of policy and reach out to our young people, as John Kennedy did and said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. There's many different ways to serve, one of which is in the military. That's honorable service. But for that question to come at this time, when we have our young people in Iraq in a war based on lies, and we have this country preparing to go to war against Iran, I think would and put it in a direction. And this forum here tonight, if it means anything, it should mean a new direction for America, away from war and towards giving our young people a real future where they can use all their talents and ability serving in many different capacities.
Thank you, Congressman. Senator Biden?
The answer is yes. Nominators to bill mandatory universal service. You get to pick one of three things. If you choose the Army, it's 6 months. If you choose a domestic Peace Corps, it's 2 years. If you choose foreign Peace Corps, you only have to do it a year. Everyone, man, woman, men and women, when they get to be 18, they can choose what they want, but there should be universal service unless there's an extreme physical disability.
Senator Obama?
Yes. The reason I now live in Chicago is because I moved to Chicago to work as a community organizer, working on the streets of Chicago to help impoverished communities. It was the best education I ever had because it taught me ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they come together. Every young person should have that opportunity to serve and do something that is bigger than themselves. And when they do it, not only does the country benefit, but they do as well.
Governor Richardson.
The answer, my answer is yes, and I outlined a plan, 2 years of college tuition paid off by the government, 1 year of national service, but I'm going to go beyond that and say that when it comes to the country sacrificing and the people sacrificing, I sense, especially in Iowa, that we need to pull together. We can't have easy answers anymore, and one area where I will ask the American people to sacrifice is when it comes to reducing our dependence on foreign oil and also reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And that means being more sensitive with mass transit and appliances and air conditioning. And I believe the American people today want to give something back. They're able all over the country to say, we want to be inspired, we want to be brought together, we want to deal with issues, and if it's for the common good, we are ready to take those steps.
Thank you, Governor. Let's go back to the panel, to Angel Gonzalez from the Iowa Commission on Latinos.
Thank you, Ray. And this question is for Senator Edwards. Union membership is the only true anti-poverty program. Union members earn up to 30% more than their non-union counterparts, and in the case of Latinos and African Americans, it goes as far as 50% difference in salaries and earnings from union members to non-union members. More than 57 million workers in this country say that they would join a union if they got a chance to do so. But when employers fire 1 in every 4 workers who wants to join a union, and when employers violate with impunity toothless labor laws that rule the labor relations these days, with impunity, what are they to do? They need a new route to really get dignity and respect in the workplace. What would you do what do you see the role of president in protecting union jobs, encouraging union jobs to flourish in this country, and protecting the right of a worker who stands up to his employer and invokes the law that protects them and gets fired for doing so?
Well, first, we need a president of the United States who's actually willing to walk on the White House lawn and say the word union. Second, we need a president of the United States who will explain to the American people that the union movement helped build the great middle class in the United States of America, been absolutely crucial, and they will be crucial to building the middle class and strengthening the middle class in the future. We have well over 50 million people, as you pointed out, in this country who would like to join a union. What we need to do, if we really want to strengthen and grow economic security, if we want to strengthen and grow the middle class in this country, we must strengthen and grow the organized labor movement. In order to do that, I know from what I have seen personally that the abuses are rampant. I mean, completely rampant. The law is on the side of big corporations, as it is in many other areas, and not on the side of workers. So what we need to do is change the law. If you can join the Republican Party by signing your name to a card, every worker in America should be able to join a union by signing their name to a card. And when I am President of the United States, and it becomes necessary for the union in strength and solidarity to go out on strike, when they're walking that picket line, no one will walk through that picket line and take their job away from them. Not when I'm President of the United States.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for the question. This has been a wonderful evening, but it's time to round the corner to our final chapter, closing statements from each of the candidates. This was decided by a random draw, the order of these closing statements, and because of that, you are going to hear again from Mr. Edwards.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for being here. Thank you for our panelists for participating. You know, here's my belief. I think we have a wall that's been built around Washington, D.C., and no one understands that wall better than African Americans and Latinos in America, because you have been left on the outside of that wall. And that wall has been built by people with money and power to protect their own interests and to make sure that their interests are taken care of and not the interests of the vast majority of the American people. It's everything from drug companies stopping universal health care, insurance companies stopping universal health care, oil companies and power companies stopping the protection of our environment and dealing with global warming. We have seen, I've seen in my own lifetime, the strength of people of courage who led the civil rights movement in America. I mentioned earlier I grew up in the segregated South. I have seen people of courage who stood up for what was right and for what was moral and just. Our generation is faced with an enormous challenge. Will we take that wall down? Will we have the strength and courage to reclaim this democracy for the many, not for the few? Because if we do, and I believe we will, with the right leadership, with the right fighter as president, we're going to meet the test, the moral test of our generation, which is to make certain that our children have a better life than we had, and to make absolutely certain that we leave America better than we found it.
Thank you, Senator Edwards. We move next to Governor Richardson.
A todos los latinos que me ven aquí, sí se puede. And I want to, you know, more than anything, we need to bring this country together. I want to thank the civil rights movement and the efforts of African Americans that paved the way for many of us. And history may be made with the election of a woman president, African American and Latino. I'm positive about this country. You know, I know we're negative sometimes and the end of the world, but you know, I'm optimistic, I'm patriotic. I think that we're moving forward. And my last point, I know this is a minority forum, but we minorities always get put in boxes. African Americans, Hispanics, pollsters, parties think, well, they only care about immigration or civil rights or affirmative action. I think what is one of the most fundamental misconceptions about minorities is that we care about all issues. We care about health care and education. We care about moving this country forward. And I just want to say that to voters of Iowa, I'm honored to have been put through this process of scrutiny, of being welcome into your homes, and I'm honored to participate today in this forum.
Governor Richardson, thank you. We hear now from Representative Dennis Kucinich.
Thank you very much. I carry a copy of the Constitution with me, which is very relevant to this audience because in the 14th Amendment it talks about the guarantees of due process and equal protection of the law. In the 15th Amendment, not denying the right to vote based on race, color. But you know what? Our Constitution is being shredded. We're losing our country to lies, to war based on lies, and to debt. This is one of the reasons why I've introduced articles of impeachment, to call this administration accountable. See, we have to start focusing on the things that people really need. I grew up in the city of Cleveland, the oldest of 7. My parents never owned a home. We were renters. We lived in 21 different places by the time I was 17, including a couple cars. So my politics is very practical. People need jobs, and that's why I stand for a full employment economy with a new WPA. People need health care. That's why I'm the only one up here who stands for a not-for-profit health care system where everyone is covered and recognizes that these health insurance companies are making money not providing health care. I stand for educational opportunities starting at age 3 and going all the way through to and including college. If you want your country back, you give me your vote and I'll give you your country back. Thank you very much.
Representative Kucinich, thank you.
For our next closing statement, we go to Senator Joe Biden, who has 1 minute.
That'll be a change. First of all, you know, there's a lot of debate in this election, and I have great respect for all my colleagues here, whether this is about experience or change. The truth is it's about action. The next president's going to have to act immediately. A lot of you wonder why I always talk about Iraq. Iraq's like a big boulder sitting in the middle of the road. It's sucking up $150 billion a year now. Unless you end that war in Iraq, all the things we all care about are not going to be able to be done. They're going to have to move quickly. We're going to have to move quickly to end this war, to get the money available to deal with health care, to deal with education, to deal with all the things we've all talked about tonight. And it is true, there's a great opportunity here. If I had gotten amnesia in 1968 when I got involved in the civil rights movement in 1964, and I woke up today and they said there was an African American and a woman and a Hispanic running, I'd say, God, that's wonderful. I mean that sincerely. I mean that sincerely. But I hope you'll all judge us, those of you. What I've found about the African American and Hispanic community, they go for whoever they think has the greatest quality, your point earlier today. And the point I'm making to you is this. Take a look at our record. My entire career is based upon civil rights, civil liberties, and working to make sure we do everything from extend the Voting Rights Act to make sure that we have a Death Penalty Procedures Act to make sure that we provide opportunity for everybody. So I hope you take a look. The American people are ready for change, folks. They're ready for change. Pragmatic, simple, straightforward solutions, but it requires action from the day we get sworn in.
Thank you, Senator. Let's go next to Senator Barack Obama.
I am running for president because of what Dr. King called the fierce urgency of now. We have urgent problems, but we've seen an administration that is adrift, and the American people understand this urgency, but they haven't had the leadership to bring people together, overcome the special interests that are dominating Washington, and speak honestly about how we're going to solve these problems. Now, I don't want to wake up 4 years from now and find out that we've got millions more young African American and Latino youth who are in prison as opposed to going to college. I don't want to wake up and find out we've got millions more Americans without health insurance. I don't want to find out that we have not made more progress in making sure that working Americans have a job that pays a living wage and can retire with dignity and with respect. I am standing here because somebody somewhere at some point in time stood up when it was risky, stood up when it was hard, stood up when it wasn't popular. We have to stand up on behalf of future generations, and if you and I join me, I promise you, we can change America.
Thank you, Senator Obama. Let's go next to Senator Christopher Dodd of Connecticut. Senator Dodd?
Well, first of all, thank all of you for inviting us to be a part of this evening. In 33 days, this state is going to make a very important decision, the first state in the country that will begin the selection process. You need to make a decision about which of us up here can win an election, first and foremost, who can not only bring Democrats but independents and Republicans who seek change to support our ticket. It is not a foregone conclusion that any Democrat we nominate will win the election next fall. We need to win that election. We need to make sure that our nominee has the ability to reach out and draw a broad section of our country to support our ideas and policies, and then to carry that forward. I know there are people who talk about turning up the heat or rallying people or firing people up. We've got to tone things down a bit, in my view, in this country here. We need to understand that we've got to come together as a people here. We need to elect a president that has the proven ability to bring people together to make a difference for our country. It's what I've done for a quarter of a century. When I started the Children's Caucus, when I wrote the Family Medical Leave Act, when I did the first child care legislation on autism, premature births, infant screening, Head Start, I brought Democrats and Republicans to make those changes in our country. That's what this country wants desperately. They're tired of the fighting. They want a nation that will once again work together to produce the results for our country. It begins in Iowa in 33 days. You have the responsibility now of choosing to send us out further in these other contests to make our case, and then to win this election, not on behalf of our party or our individual candidacies. We are all at risk here, and it is our joint task as a generation to make a difference for our country and the world in which we live. And I thank you for the opportunity to make my case. Thank you all very much.
Senator Clinton.
I'm running for president to continue the work that I've done for 35 years, work that is incredibly important to me, that I've seen literally transform lives, from my work with the Children's Defense Fund, to chairing the Legal Services Corporation, to fighting for change in Arkansas for better education and health care, to helping to create the state children's health insurance program to insure 6 million children in our country, to working in a bipartisan manner in the Senate to really solve what should be nonpartisan American problems. We have a lot of work to do, and whoever holds up his or her hand to take the oath of office on January 20th, 2009, will have to begin immediately to repair the damage that has been done by the Bush-Cheney administration, but more importantly, to restore pride in our country again, to begin to do the hard work of making sure every American has health care, to having an energy policy that will put millions of Americans to work with green-collar jobs, and a lot of those necks and those collars are going to be black and brown, to having an education system that works for everyone from pre-kindergarten to college affordability, to once again send out a message around the world that American values will be respected, not only around the world, but here at home. I'm running for president to make it clear that we will make progress together, and I hope that I can earn your support for the Iowa caucuses, because that's where the road to the White House starts. Thank you all very much.
I'd like to thank this large and enthusiastic audience who came to North High School in Des Moines tonight. They were terrific and right with it and paying attention to every answer. It's great to have you with us tonight. Thanks to all the candidates for being with us in Des Moines as well.
And thanks also to Wayne Ford and Mary Campos, the founders of the Iowa Brown and Black debate.
And for Michelle Norris, I'm Ray Suarez. Thanks for being with us. Good night.